In the age of ancients, the world was unformed, shrouded by fog. A land of grey crags, arch trees, and everlasting dragons. But then there was fire. Nito unleashed a miasma of death and disease. And Seath the Scaleless betrayed his own, and the dragons were no more.
From Software's award-winning lineup of games pioneered the Souls-like genre in the world of video games, each release more spectacular than the last, which led to a plethora of heavily and clearly inspired Souls-like games, all spirit-crushing experiences packed into sprawling, yet beautiful, dark fantasy worlds. The legendary reputation and sheer brutality of the Souls games rewarded players who worked hard to get better, and through patience, commitment, and a sprinkle of insanity, you can say with the utmost of confidence, you're a real gamer and you got good. Showcasing moments that require split-second decision-making, and at times, repetitious muscle memory, these games were the pinnacle of difficulty in video gaming, and From Software's reliable, steady releases will always keep players from all gaming backgrounds coming back for more demon slaying, or to die, and die, and die again. So with the growth and accelerated expansion of board gaming, we were gonna get a Souls-like board game eventually. What I didn't expect was Dark Souls, the board game. Charging into 2016, the Dark Souls journey began with a Kickstarter campaign which had a funding goal of £50,000. It funded insanely fast, blowing right past that target, and by the end of the campaign, it had amassed over £3.7 million and around 31,000 backers, which, to be honest, in 2016 is pretty ridiculous. This campaign was a monumental achievement and immediately cemented itself to become one of the most anticipated board games of all time. Imagine setting up some giant beast of a game because we know it'll have to be big, and then dying again, and again, and again. Wait, this board game stays true to the Dark Souls name while still remaining to be fun to play, right? Now, I have played From Software's Dark Souls 2 and 3, as well as Bloodborne and Elden Ring. And whilst I enjoyed those games immensely and appreciated what From Software were able to create, I can't say I finished any of them because I found myself getting increasingly frustrated at my own inability to perform under pressure, and I'm sure I rage quit all of them at some stage, with the exception of Elden Ring. I mean, that game was pretty phenomenal.
Someone must extinguish thy flame. Let it be Margit the Fell.
Oh, shout out to Mangy, my dear friend. When the Elden Ring Kickstarter eventually came out, I backed it and then cancelled it because I couldn't justify spending all of that money at the time. And then he went and bought me an all-in, randomly, one day as a gift. So that's coming one day, thanks mate. Sorry, back to Dark Souls, the board game. So did Steamforged Games smash it out of the park and earn every piece of that £3.7 million funding goal? Or did it kind of go down like a dead balloon? You get it? Because you die a lot. Upon arrival to the Dark Souls Kickstarter page, you're not only welcomed with its funding goal and big lovely image of what looks like a huge square box with those awesome words, Dark Souls, written on it, but you also get a video which opens with a brief narration of what the general concept of the board games, and pictures of the cards, miniatures and components, and then it kind of leads straight to a convention where Steamforged showed people from the public the game, and players got a chance to experience it and provide feedback, further feeding the hype. Now, I enjoy it when a campaign has a video showing as much of the game as possible. Some with those amazing 3D rendered pieces moving around, narrated by a smooth talking person. It really gets your appetite wet. But this one didn't grab me as much. Too much focus on convention goers' reactions, not enough card art components, you know, the stuff you're actually buying. But alas, I remember when this campaign launched, there was a lot of speculation on its legitimacy because, as far as I know, this was the publisher's first Kickstarter campaign game under the Steamforged name. I believe they also have Guild Ball in their wheelhouse, but it was crowdfunded separately. So yeah, this kind of already raised a few red flags and had people gossiping over whether or not they could pull it off, especially landing such a huge video game IP. But I guess it didn't matter. I think it smashed a bunch of Kickstarter records within the first few hours, so hey, a good IP will get you anything. There were 3 pledge levels, and look, the retailer pledge doesn't really count, so 2 pledge levels. And look, this was back when doing early bird pledges were a thing, which, let's be real, is stupid and frustrating to the general consumer, especially if they miss out. You shouldn't be rewarding, like, people for spamming refresh on a campaign page over and over and over again to save $5, but you want to make one of those funded in half a second banners. We get it. But as you scroll down to look at all the goodies you get, you realize in the base pledge, you actually get a fair bit of content, which is refreshing, because those who want it later will still be able to pick it up at retail, I assume, but you get it included, which actually felt nice. But then you get hit with all the additional content you can add later. The Gaping Dragon expansion, the Black Dragon Calamite, the Guardian Dragon, the 4 Kings, the Asylum Demon, oh my god, and this was back when I wasn't reckless with my money. So I was carefully looking over all of this thinking, don't know if I can justify all this. Well, my attitude has changed considerably since. Thank you so much, Awakened Realms and Peterson Games. So, this was a smooth sailing, successful campaign, right? Here is where Steamforged came under a lot of fire, and boy did those pitchforks come out. The Kickstarter updates, they were flowing like after the campaign and leading to fulfillment, and look, it wasn't good. Things were being delayed, deadlines were being pushed back, shipping was in tatters. For a brief rundown of the updates, a Reddit user, Wolfsfang, posted in the Dark Souls board game subreddit a consolidated list of updates from the Kickstarter page and finished this post with, "Remind me never to do business with your company ever again. I feel sorry for your partners." Following this, the most upvoted post going to Devon the Mac said, "I'll never buy an item from them ever again. And I go out of my way to vocalize and warn others not to back their Kickstarters. I get there are logistics involved, but I feel like the company is flying blind and has never done this before, and they were 100% unapologetic." Now, I tend not to follow Kickstarter updates too frequently, so I don't really dive into threads such as these, but in general, the outlook wasn't looking promising for certain backers, and I'm not here to dive into all of that. A quick Google search of problems with Steamforged games resulted in a bunch of threads talking about the handlings of all sorts of issues during the years. But enough about that. I backed it. Can't remember what I added to it. And paid. And waited. As you do. And when it finally arrived, what did I think? Okay, so this is awkward. I still haven't opened it. Let me explain. I sometimes can be a sucker for reviews and opinions from the community. And when this beast of a game started hitting backers in 2017, I was all over the reviews and thoughts on people who received and played Dark Souls. And it wasn't like overly promising. The problems seemed to stem from the repetitiveness and grind of getting your team prepared to fight the big bad. I mean, that was what made the Souls series so iconic, right? The boss fights. And it seemed that a large portion of the game was fighting many smaller minions with its fairly intuitive, yet insanely repetitive combat system. To then earn the currency to purchase new gear, which was a dead set requirement to fight the end boss. You're not going to see any naked no-hits lol easy videos popping up here. Okay, I say that, but there's probably out there that people who have, recorded it and done that and all that kind of stuff. This soul farming grind is probably not a huge deal breaker in many video games, but in tabletop board gaming, this may not translate well. Grinding in a board game just doesn't really work, nor does it have the same effect it does in its digital counterpart. It's ultimately something that sounds kind of cool in theory, and rather terrible in practice. With many reviews hitting Board Game Geek, a humongous database of every board game ever concepted, I found one review where I connected with their writing style and their assessment of what one might expect when playing this game. And whilst I'm aware that every review is different, when multiple sources are talking about similar mediocre experiences with a game, it's sometimes enough for me to label it as a too hard basket game and put it on the shelf never to be used or played, at least not anytime soon. So reviews of this ilk were coming in short and fast, and before you knew it, Dark Souls the board game had the reputation of an almost but not quite retelling of a legendary IP. And yeah, the largest problem seems to mostly stem from the grindy nature of accumulating souls for a chance at random gear upgrades that you most probably can't equip due to the stat requirements, which funnily enough, you can increase provided you use said souls instead to pay for a stat enhancement, which of course gets more expensive the higher you want to raise them. This meant in any given run, you may spend half your spooky death currency pulling 16 swords with stupidly high strength and dexterity requirements, whilst not saving enough to increase said stats. Or you might get that sword upgrade, finally, only to continue pulling another 16 swords, knowing you only have 2 hands, and you're still running around with your basic starter armor, which isn't going to save you from a stupidly large attack from the boss. This puts way too much emphasis on the RNG element of progression, and look, I'm a big advocate of this design, as I love the mystery of, ooh, what am I going to get this time? But when it has such a heavy influence on whether you can comfortably clear a dungeon versus I see those big red letters in my dreams, it's a problem. So funnily enough, I went into my game's wardrobe and tried to search. I kind of wanted to open it up and play a game of it myself. And when I recorded the unshrinking of the wrap, there was a layer of dust so thick my finger went black. Super amusing and just knowing that it had been sitting in there the whole time, but hey, look, I got to finally opening it then and there, and then finally getting to play a first game. After punching the game and learning it, setting it up, I played a few sessions with my partner, and I didn't explain any of these potential shortcomings to him. I also didn't consider them too heavily myself, as I wanted to go into this playthrough with an open mind, as I've had issues with reviewers panning a game I legitimately liked, so anything could envelop from this experience. So we got to demon slaying, that first room, moving the minis and deciding the patterns of attack. It was actually fun. Throwing dice to see how much damage we inflicted or whether an attack on us was dodged. I was having fun. Seeing my partner anticipate an attack, move out of position, then thrust his spear into the last mob made me cheer, hell yeah, nice work, until we did it probably for the 4th time. See, just like in the video game, when you rest at a bonfire to heal up and recoup, the monsters reset, everything respawns, and you have to go through all the encounters again. And my partner said, wait, we have to clear all of that again? I could see the disappointment. Yeah, we need to farm the souls so we can get stronger for when we have a stab at the boss. And he let out a bit of a groan. It was hard to avoid the overall disappointment being experienced in the room. We've played a lot of dungeon crawlers, maybe not to completion, but we've had the opportunity to try a lot of systems. And the ebb and flow of a game like Dark Souls, it just really wasn't looking bright. It just wasn't meshing. Now, the way souls work, you get a set amount of souls for clearing an encounter, and it's based on player count, which to an extent makes sense. But this led him to asking, can we just say we cleared all of these monsters and go straight to the boss? And even though I disagree due to the variance of the encounters and that RNG could potentially screw us, costing us a spark charge, which is a game mechanic that limits how often you can rest and get all of your special tokens back, it felt like such a slog to do it legitimately, as you're making the same decisions at each encounter, with dice rolls literally being the difference maker. We cleared the encounters again and decided to try the mini-boss. This was something I had anticipated, as Dark Souls has the reputation of some of the hardest bosses in video game history, and I wondered how that would translate to its cardboard cousin. Well, to be fair, it was probably the saving grace of the game, as the very behavior cards gave the boss a menacing personality, and right from the first card flip, it felt like an absolute challenge, reminiscing of epic encounters such as fighting your quarry in Kingdom Death Monster. So yeah, hands down, the boss fights mechanically were a shining light in a fairly, so far, mediocre title. If you manage to get the boss down to a certain HP threshold as well, you get new cards added to their behavior deck, increasing the difficulty of the encounter and forcing you to strategize differently whilst avoiding the stupidly hard-hitting swings and abilities being thrown your way. This fire-up mechanism really gives the bosses that game mechanic that's tricky to replicate well, the Phase 2 as seen in various video game boss, and this really adds to the overall polish to the boss fights and really starts to redeem the game. But not quite enough. Look, I was excited when Dark Souls was announced. I was then apprehensive when reviews started pouring in. I was then excited again when 7 years later I would start a little YouTube channel and talk about some of these games, and one of them was Dark Souls. And now here we are where I finished with disappointment. The game has received a bazillion variants and house rules, which according to members of the community have made the game a lot more enjoyable, and apparently these fixed the game to a point where it's actually receiving a fair bit of praise now. This is what makes board gaming as a hobby so rewarding, as the community coming together and enhancing everyone's experiences with tips and files and guides. And it seems like Steamforged Games listened, because they got busy recently and released 2 updated versions of the board game with Dark Souls Tomb of Giants and Dark Souls Painted World of Ariamis, both super expensive and funnily enough not backwards compatible with the original Dark Souls the board game, although you can bring the minis and some other components with you and use them in the newest version of the game. Apart from the price, these updated versions of Dark Souls fix a lot of the niggling issues people have with the base game. But at what cost? Well, yeah, it's a lot. And I can say quite comfortably I'm not interested in collecting these at any stage. This whole experience has soured many people from supporting Steamforged Games and their future projects, but not everyone. Due to the uncanny ability to secure some of video gaming's biggest IPs, their presence is still going stronger than ever, and I believe the love for these IPs, at least initially, are pulling them over the line. After Dark Souls, we got Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3, Horizon Zero Dawn, Devil May Cry, Monster Hunter World, which, when this came out, my dislike for Steamforged had waned, and I figured, they keep getting these IPs and making a crap ton of money, they must be doing something right. RuneScape Kingdoms, and more recently Elden Ring. I mean, if you like video games, look at the resume. Whether or not these games absolutely kill it is anyone's guess, as I haven't looked into most of them, but Monster Hunter World is with me, so I will get to that at some stage, and I'm actually looking forward to it. So here we are, a game I can say confidently will not be played in my home ever again. Dark Souls has some very good ideas and does find a way to convey the feeling you're playing an analog cardboard version of the absolute beast of an IP it's born from. But for me, it's probably best if it stayed down. Did you back Dark Souls? Did you fix Dark Souls? Have you managed to squeeze some good love out of this game? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for joining me on another look back. I've been Deddy, and remember, when it comes to rolling terribly, it's all in the wrist.